Alright, so that's the hubris and vainglory out of the way.
Let me make me say it.
Alright, this is a story called The River Boys. When we were reaching the point in our lives where we might no longer be called young, my brother and I would go down to the river and we would swim there, and we would float in the river together until our bodies grew tired and pruny and wrinkled, like the people we were aware, in those days especially, that we would one day soon become. Our mother just passed, and we were drifting a lot. Sometimes when we were doing that drifting, or swimming, or floating, or tugging on the crab pots to check the heft of them, James, who was 3 years my junior, would ask questions. He'd ask things like, "Where do dead people go?" And after thinking about it for a while or longer, I'd come back with a question of my own. For instance, what is a specific moment during the dying process? That is, during the systematic shutting down of the body when you pass from living to dead. Is it when the brain shuts down? The heart? Which part of the brain? Which part of the heart? My brother would stare at me, his eyes all glazed over as we treaded the water and watched how its surface became tiny waves that washed away from him and from me, and how when they hit in the space between us, they didn't move anymore. Every time we spoke like that, my brother thought I was a genius. Truth was, I just didn't have any answers. When we were done in the water, we dragged ourselves to shore, and on the shore we heaved up the crab pots and we poured the clawed bastards into an esky and tied up their claws and carried them home. The fishmongers bought from us twice a week, and we liked to keep the crabs alive out of courtesy. That's what it was to us, a courtesy. And so James and I carried together the esky down the road, and we switched sides when our arms got tired or when the plastic handles dug too far into our skin, and we would sometimes stop and sit in the shade, particularly if it was one of those warm days where we had left our trip to the river too close to noon. In the months that followed our mother's funeral, we got more calls to the house than we ever had. We met a lot of our family then, James and I. Even though we met most of them just once at the funeral, we did value the connection. And a smaller number of those relatives did come by a second time as well. During the single weekend visits they all seemed to do on rotation, back when it was getting even harder to peel our father from his place in front of the silent TV. This large group of people known by blood was a new kind of connection for me and James to understand. We had always, as crabbers, known the tethered workings of the tide and the rain in our hall, and we knew those things were inseparable. It felt somehow like we had always known those things were inseparable. Like we had known since even before Dad gave us his pots after he came back from the fishing trip. Since before Dad gave us his pots after his back went out during a fishing trip, and we started taking the pots out in his place when James wasn't even a teenager yet, and when we did it first at fun and then as a way to make money for the family while his back healed up. He'd always talk about that, the day his back was going to be good again. About how he'd go back to that huge vessel, the one he'd manned for months at a time, so he could bring in a year's income in one season. Our father knew a job like that meant more time with the family, even if it didn't feel like it to us when he was gone. Dad's back never healed, and he never went back out on the boat. For a while he worked at the local paper, operating the press and tugging at page 7 whenever it jammed up the whole bloody thing, but he had to stop that after a while too. His back was stressed from the bending, and he was stressed as well, and so he retired early. He still read the paper every day though, even after he left work, and for the rest of their time together, Mum and Dad shared the house every day of the week. They shared us too, when we were around and not in school, or out shooting shit with the other boys, or crab potting in the river, or swimming there when we could find a moment to ourselves, keeping our bodies afloat atop the water, a break from keeping our family above the bottom line. When Mum died, Dad stopped moving so much, and he wasn't moving a lot when she was alive. The complex thing with injuries, Mum told us once, is that they are never just physical. Every part of the body is attached to every other part, and that includes the brain and the heart, and one of those two places is where the soul is kept, and so Dad's soul was hurting, and that's why he was in his chair a lot. Sometimes Mum would lie down on the flower print sheets where Dad was lying, and she would tell him to whisper her the names of what he saw in the ceiling, which was where he'd been staring all day. He told her he saw waves and boats and fish, and the fish were jumping over the waves, and the boat was full of big men who were good at their jobs, and he was on the boat, and he was happy too. That's what Mum told us he saw.